need help on the, on the rent assistance program here.
Yeah, I know we're going to get people on, and I do record these because we get quite a few people on, and then a lot of people said, "Oh, Johnny Med is on." There it goes. Yeah, want to just kind of mute yourself and just let Dale and I talk. For people who haven't met Dale at one of our conventions, Dale has a company called Lease Coach. We hired him for United Professionals. I don't know, it's probably 15, could be 20 years ago, to do a segment. After that, I know he did a segment for Maya. He's helped quite a few of our clients either renegotiate leases, get new leases, find buildings, buy buildings. So he's just done an amazing job. Johnny Ahmed from Canada started talking to him about just the challenges he's having right now, having to close his school because of the coronavirus, just like all you guys, and now in a position where, rent's due and things like that. We have talked about a couple times on things we possibly can do, but I am nowhere near the expert that Dale Willerton is. So he said he'd like to come on and talk. He gave me some questions, but could you just kind of tell us a little bit about what you're doing, Mr. Willerton?
Thank you, Greg. It's really a pleasure to be here. Time just flies, but it's been 27 years since I started and became the lease coach. Before that, I used to work for landlords. I was a shopping center manager. I was a leasing rep working for landlords, and I realized it really wasn't the landlord that needed my help. It was tenants. So in 1993, I switched to the tenant side. Started giving seminars, started working with tenants. This is actually my third book on the subject. We want to put a free copy of this in everybody's hands. It's on today. And it's sort of been my passion career. I didn't know when I was a shopping center manager that I was going to be the lease coach now. And it's a lot of fun. This is sort of what keeps me young, is negotiating all these leases and all these different tenants and different stories and different landlords. It's amazing. We've been able to open up 8 offices, 4 in Canada and 4 in the United States. So we service all of North America from these offices with various coaches and consultants who are all part of the Lease Coach brand and team.
Nice, excellent. Probably early last month, we started talking about what's going to happen if the schools had to close, and all our schools end up closing the doors. Most of them are doing some type of online classes. A couple of our schools that had known their landlords for a long time, the landlords actually approached them with some type of relief this month, but that's not the general norm. So I guess everyone's looking for, with this pandemic, is there some type of rent assistance that people can ask for their landlords, and how would they go about doing that?
Well, absolutely, Greg. And there's a whole process to this. It's not as simple as just asking the landlord and accepting what they give you. And so I'm going to, combine a few of the pre-written questions that I sent to you so we can answer this more completely for everyone as we go along. All I can say is thank God that landlords are stepping up and are helping their tenants, but it is it is different across the country, different for different tenants. Different landlords are doing different amounts of assistance. We call it rent assistance, Greg, because there's a lot of misunderstanding about the actual terminology, which is rent relief, rent deferral, or rent abatement. They are not the same. You want rent abatement. That's what we try to get for the tenant, a forgiveness of the rent. If a tenant is simply getting a rent deferral, that does not necessarily, that helps them today, but it simply means that they have to repay that amount sometime in the future. So in a perfect world, you're getting rent abatement, not a rent deferral. And most landlords are offering some deferral, but you've got to negotiate for more, for the actual abatement. Too many tenants are going to their landlord with a cup when they should be going with a pail. Too many tenants are not asking or trying to get enough assistance for enough months. And so that's one of the mistakes I see them making. And even when the tenant approaches the landlord, often it's the wrong way. The typical tenant will call up their landlord, and say, I can't pay the rent this month. Can I defer this month? You start asking for something. When I call up a landlord, the first thing I say to them is I say, do you, Mr. Landlord, do you have a rent assistance plan or program for your tenants? Most of the listeners here today, Greg, only have one landlord. They've got one location and they've got one landlord. Most of these landlords have hundreds of tenants, don't they? They have hundreds of tenants. So the landlords are putting a plan together. The landlords are getting ready. Some of them are more proactive than others, but you know, you've really got to get the landlord to say, yes, we're going to waive half your rent, or yes, we're going to do this. And then the goal is to negotiate beyond that, negotiate for more.
What do you think the biggest mistake martial art tenants are making about, is that it just, they're not asking for enough?
They're not asking for enough, and they're not doing it properly. You know, I always say, and there's some actual truth to this. I wish I had more martial arts studio owners as my friends, but I wouldn't let them negotiate my lease. They're almost too nice for their own good, right? I mean, one of the unique things that your industry has is that you have customers who have prepaid you for classes, who are now maybe not experiencing those classes, and you're getting calls from moms and dads saying, can I have some money back? You know, restaurant tenants don't have that. You know, there's millions of restaurants closed. There's 600,000 restaurants in America that are closed. They don't have anybody calling and asking for money back. So you guys really have pressure on you from multiple angles. So yeah, you've got to be very proactive, and you've got to understand that when it comes to asking the landlord for rent assistance, no doesn't always mean no. When I used to work for landlords, we kind of had a secret policy. If a tenant wanted something and the tenant did not make the request 5 times, we never paid any attention to them. Okay? If you asked once, if you asked twice, if you asked 3 times, well, that's fine. Let's find out how bad he really needs it. Once he asks 5 times, then we'll start to work on his situation.
One of the questions you asked me, and I really didn't understand what we said, dollar-wise or percent-wise, how much rent assistance or reduction should a martial arts tenant aim to get?
Yes. Well, so tenants are saying, you know, I'm doing some classes, I have some income. And remember, I consult to all different industries, not just martial arts. So you want a 100% rent abatement. You don't want a 50% rent abatement. You don't want a 1-month rent abatement. This is going to go on for many, many months. Even if they let you reopen your doors, let's say at the end of May, June 1st, July, your doors are reopened. A lot of moms aren't going to let their kids come back. It's going to be a really slow recovery process. So you really need to think longer, more months, all the months that you're not at your current level. You have the ability to say to the landlord, look, in March of last year, my sales revenues were X. This year, March was this, April was this. So you have something to measure it by, and you'll know when you get back to norm. You'll know. One of the possible upsides, and this is just kind of a throw in here, Greg, is that in every single industry, the last men standing are going to probably see a bit of a surge in business. If 20% of the restaurants in America close, the other 80% are going to get their customers. And the same thing applies in the martial arts industry. So if you can survive this, but some of your competitors don't, you may be able to pick up their students and actually have a pretty good 2021.
Mm-hmm. I was listening to someone else say you can get a rent assistance, but you still have to pay CAM charges.
Yes. Well, you don't. I mean, it's negotiable. Most landlords will defer the CAM charges if you ask for it. See, when a tenant is talking to a landlord, they don't think to ask for the CAM. They just talk about the rent as the whole thing, right? In martial arts, there's a lot of tenants who are paying gross rents. They pay a certain amount per month no matter what. Some martial arts tenants are paying triple net rent. They're paying a base rent of $20 per square foot, plus they're paying their share of common area maintenance charges. And so you have to factor that in. You want to defer or not pay the CAM as well, okay? 95% of all leases, Greg, are triple net leases. So gross leases are not that common. You have to deal with the CAM, and you don't want to pay it now. The CAM is the portion of the rent that the landlord doesn't get to keep. It's what they use to pay their property taxes and their building maintenance and painting the building and asphalt repairs and things like that. So it is a different rent to the landlord, but you want it to be forgiven as well. You want it abated.
So you're going in there asking for the rent and the CAM, because if you just say rent without the CAM, they're probably still going to charge you the CAM fees.
Well, that's right. And you know what happens is after a week or two of verbal negotiation and a couple of emails, then the landlord finally gets around to sending you a document. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. And when the document shows up, it says, well, we'll defer your base rent, but you still have to pay your CAM, right? You didn't realize what you had left out of the negotiation until you saw it in writing.
Right.
Okay.
You had one here. What is force? Was it majeure?
Force majeure, yes. Force majeure in a lease agreement is the anticipation of an uncontrollable circumstance, an act of God, something like that. And so there's been a lot of talk, maybe not so much for tenants, but like I'm an industry insider. So when landlords and groups of attorneys and people get together for these sort of insider meetings, they're talking about force majeure. And will this act of God, exempt the tenants from paying the rent? And the answer is no, for a couple of reasons. First of all, if your lease agreement has a force majeure clause, it's probably worded only to protect the landlord. If the landlord can't deliver the property to you or let you be in the property, you can't sue them, you can't do anything, right? It doesn't necessarily protect the tenant. So don't get hung up on this. If you hear people saying, oh, force majeure is going to save me, well, you won't even get to test force majeure for a year until you get in court. Well, if you have to wait a year to get rent assistance, you probably won't be in business.
Very, very cool. Yeah, I was wondering what that meant.
Mm-hmm.
One of the other questions, what I would have thought about, can tenants offer to let the landlord apply some of their security deposit to upcoming rent payment?
Yeah, and this is a pretty common first thought for most tenants. So you've got a $6,000 security deposit, you've got a $5,000 a month rent. You say to the landlord, look, take $5,000 out of my security deposit. The reason that landlords don't find this an attractive solution is that they are not legally required to keep the security deposit in a separate account or trust account. When you pay the landlord a security deposit, that money is commingled with the landlord's general funds. So if you say take it out of my security deposit, there really is no security deposit to take it out of.
Okay.
What about those, Mr. Silva, that haven't got any response from the landlord? No response. They're not responding, or they're not giving anything. Is there an abatement program? No, we don't have anything.
Well, okay, but see, that's different. If they're saying they see sometimes when I'm negotiating with a landlord and they're smooth talkers, okay, remember, they're used to dealing with tenants. You're not used to dealing with landlords. I will have to say to the landlord, now, this is my request. Are you saying you can't help us? Do you really mean you can't help us, or you won't help us? I make them define it, because if they say they won't help you, that's a different story. Okay, you just can't let them off the hook just because they're not returning your calls, or they're saying we don't have a program. Sometimes, and I'll say this cautiously because you have to be careful if you employ this strategy, but let's say that you were prepared to pay half the rent. I've had clients in this situation. I'll go to my client and I'll say, write me a rent check for half the amount payable to the landlord, and give me a spare keys to your business. And I'll go to the property manager and I'll say, I've got some good news and some bad news. The bad news is we can't afford to pay all the rent. The good news is we can afford to pay half. Would you like this half rent check, or would you like the keys back to the business? And I hold my hands out. No property manager has ever taken the keys back. So you might have to ask for, rather than trying to ask for permission not to pay the rent, you may have to ask for forgiveness after you don't pay the rent. It can put you in a default position, but I mean, if you go too many months without income, there's not going to be any business left. Sometimes you just have to grab the bull by the horns. But I really encourage you, hold their feet to the fire. Are you saying you won't help us, or are you saying you can't help us? What is the difference? Okay.
Kind of going along that, you had mentioned in the correspondence there are 5 different types of landlords.
Right, and this is so important. There are mom and pop landlords. Sometimes you're in a plaza, you're in a property, and the owners of the property are tenants in the property too, or they live just down the street. Well, they're easier to communicate with, but they typically have less financial depth. They typically have a mortgage on the property. And so, Greg, it can be quite a bit more difficult for them to help you if if they collect the rent from you and that represents their mortgage payment and they have no cushion, it's harder for them to help you. We've had a couple situations where the mom and pop landlord have been able to get the bank, their mortgage holder, to defer their mortgage payment for 3 months. So they're willing to go back and let the tenants defer their rent payment for 3 months. Okay, that's a nice cooperative way to approach it. Mom and pop landlords are probably no more sophisticated than you are. But when you start working your way up the ladder to the other types of landlords, like developers, I used to work for a developer, Greg. They would buy a piece of land, they would design a building, they would pre-lease it, they would fill the building with tenants, and then 2 years later, they would sell the building and move on and do it again. They take their $2 million profit and move on and do it again. There's nothing wrong with that, but some of you don't have the same landlord today that you had when you signed your lease agreement. I happen to be at one of the Lease Coach offices right now where I'm sitting. I've been in this office for 5 years. I'm on my 3rd landlord, right? So different landlords act differently and have different amounts of money. There are very large landlords that are real estate investment trusts. So if your landlord is a real estate investment trust or an insurance company or a big institutional landlord, there is no landlord. There's a board of directors, there's shareholders. And so now they're following policies, okay? Sometimes you can actually meet the landlord. Sometimes you can't get past the property manager. And you have to understand they have different situations too. So if you don't know who your landlord is, start looking into them. Do a couple of Google searches and find out who they are. I'll give you one little case in point. One of the landlords I used to work for, this was back in 1992. Okay, they had a whole bunch of strip plazas, Greg, and I was leasing these strip plazas for them. Okay, that's what I did in my prior life, and what the tenants didn't know was that this landlord was so financially weak, they were losing one tenant a month. Excuse me, they were losing one building a month into receivership. They had a whole bunch of buildings. But they couldn't pay their mortgage. They were borrowing from Peter to pay Paul, and they'd get money from these tenants, and they'd pay it on this mortgage building, and then they'd lose that building. Your landlord, I was hired for a lease renewal negotiation because my meat and potatoes project are negotiating lease renewals. I was handled for a lease renewal negotiation 3 months ago, and 2 weeks after the tenant hired me, the mom and pop landlord lost the building into receivership. And I had to negotiate the whole renewal with the receiver who was reporting to the mortgage holder. Okay, get to know your landlord. Get to know your property manager. Remember, your property managers are being swamped with calls right now. You're not the only one. If you have to phone 3 times, if you have to send 5 emails to get on the phone with them, it's not necessarily because they're ignoring you. It's because they are overloaded during this season. Every tenant is calling their landlord.
I'm looking at a couple people that I know that are on. They have good relationships with the landlord. It'll be really hard for them, or just like me, to do what you did when you say, okay, take this check or take these keys. I mean, because, there's kind of a friendship built in there because you've been there for a long time. Is that what we need you?
Well, I'm emotionally detached. My objectivity is really, really part of my success, right? Your business is your baby, and you feel really close to your business, and you're really sensitive to it. You're emotionally involved, and I'm a lot more objective. You know, it's part of the reason they don't let doctors operate on their children, right? Because you're too emotionally caught up in it. So the important thing to remember is that when I'm talking to a landlord, I am very diplomatic. I am very polite. I'm very professional. There's no fist pounding. It's really a finesse negotiation, not a bully negotiation. Okay? And I really believe that, you know, this is like a boxing match. Most of you just want this to be over. If you had your way, this would be one phone call, one quick negotiation, it would be done. But the truth is, I sometimes have to go 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 rounds with these landlords to get you what you need. Because you may need rent assistance for the next 6 to 12 months. This is not a 1-month thing. You know, it was 1 month ago that I was speaking at a conference, Greg, at Javits Center in New York City, in Manhattan, 1 month ago. And 2 weeks after that, they turned it into a hospital, right? Everybody I talk to says it feels like it's been 3 or 4 months what we've just gone through. It feels like months, but it's only really been weeks, right? Most of you are only dealing with your April 1st rent payment issue right now. But May is 2 weeks away. What are we going to do for May?
That's what really gets me nervous about our whole industry. That, you know, I was talking to a client just before I talked to you. He said if things go bad, he can make it through 2 months without a problem. Third month, he would have to put a lot of money from his pockets in. After that, it would kind of, so there's some schools are even closer to having to close than that. If they had to pay 2 months rent because they've been living with the paycheck. So they really need long-term, because the more you listen to it, it's not going to happen overnight. I was watching where in China kind of reopened, and now people who had the virus at one time a few months ago are getting it again. So the second round of this could even be stronger. So are you saying negotiations right now have to be for 6 months to a year? Or
well, I'm saying be careful if you're agreeing to a 1 month or a 2 month rent reprieve, because then you're going to be back at the table in 2 months, and the landlord's going to say, but we never agreed to give you any more, right? So every time there's a document that the tenant has to sign, I want to make sure that it doesn't say no further assistance will be provided. Like, be careful what promises you make with the documents that you sign, right? Because this is going to take a year for sure. And, you know, and another thing that's really important, I think, Greg, to say that you probably know, but landlords don't know. Your customers are very, very valuable to their owners, their moms and dads, right? It's one thing to say, well, I'll go to that restaurant in 3 months. But are they going to be willing to send their kids back into your dojo, into your studio, right? And so landlords don't comprehend that. Landlords are kind of thinking, well, as soon as your doors open, it's back to normal. It's not going to be back to normal for you. It's not.
No, I say two things that I think that's true, because it may start where it's just like 10 to 1. And so you have 10 people in the building. So then does that mean you have 5 kids and 5 parents until the people come in? My daughter happens to be overprotective. I can't see her allowing my grandkids back into a building for a few months till after she sees, okay, everything's going to be okay. She wouldn't go running back.
That's right. That's right. See, if you're able to go back to your landlord and say, we did a fairly formal survey of all of our students and their parents, and we know that only 40% are coming back the first month. Right? We know that. That's what they have told us. Therefore, I'd really appreciate a 60% rent break for July or June. You know, and you're even more unique in the sense that you end up having to deal with summer and summer camps, right? Right? You know, like the restaurants and everybody else might open right in the busy summer period. For some of you, the summer isn't all that profitable or busy.
Or just the opposite. If people do summer camps and they get, 30, 40 kids per week, they're making a lot. So they're going to lose quite a bit in the summertime.
Yeah. I'm surprised though a lot. It's kind of, not every martial arts studio owner that I'm talking to is telling me they've got a big summer program. Some of you do and some of you don't. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. We usually go about a half hour of these meetings.
Yeah. Perfect.
If people need help and they don't want to do it on their own from your advice today, and they just need some assistance, how do they contact you? What can you do for them?
Well, we have a rent assistance package or project. It's $1,500. So you can reach out to me for a free consult. We'll send you a complimentary copy of my Four Dummies book. The co-author to this book is Jeff Granfield. Jeff or myself will be the one talking to you. We'll have a phone conversation that costs you nothing. If you decide that you want us to approach your landlord on your behalf, if you want us to coach you as you approach the landlord and negotiate some rent relief, we'll work with you for 45 to 60 days to put that into place. Okay, some of you can justify that, some of you can't. But reviewing the document, what I get every single day, I get sent, once we've negotiated the rent assistance package for the tenant, the landlord sends the document. Well, the document becomes another negotiation because there's all kind of garbage in there, Greg, saying, well, if you default in the future, you have to pay all this money back, or you have to do this, or, it accelerates your personal guarantee and stuff like that. So definitely go to our website at theleasecoach.com and fill out our form, or just email me. If you go to our website, our contact information is all over the place. Dale Willerton at theleasecoach.com. I prefer if you use email to book an appointment. Like, for example, we're recording this at noon Eastern time. Well, my whole day and part of tomorrow is already booked. So if I get an email from you, I might book something for Wednesday afternoon or Thursday morning to talk with you and talk you through it. And we can get you signed up very quickly and talk to your landlord. It's worth negotiating for. If you're just paying your rent and not getting any rent assistance, you're not like most other tenants in America. Most tenants are getting some form of rent assistance, Greg.
Excellent. And some of these school owners are paying high rents. I mean, I don't know anyone who just pays like $1,500 a month rent. Some of these guys are paying $6,000, $8,000, $10,000 for rent.
Well, that's right. And, as I said before, my typical meat and potatoes project is negotiating a lease renewal. Now, we don't just negotiate lease renewals. We try to negotiate lease renewal rent reductions for tenants. And so if you're within 18 months of your lease expiring, and you decide, well, I'm gonna hire Dale or Jeff, I'm gonna hire the lease coach to negotiate my renewal, we'll do your rent assistance package at no charge. Okay, we'll approach the landlord now, try to get you rent assistance now, because we want to open up the door to the rent renewal. Here's a little bit of silver lining for you in all of this, Greg. 3 months ago, market rents were at the highest they would be. 6 months, 9 months, 12 months from now, if you're going through the lease renewal, industry market rents are going to be at their lowest. So if your lease is coming up for renewal in the next 18 months, the good news is we'll probably be able to renew your lease at a substantially lower rental rate, okay? Not at half price, but if you can get 15, 20, 25% off your rent for the next 3 to 5 years, that's a lot better than paying full rent. It's that timing thing, like with the stock market and everything, buy low and sell high. Well, you want to renew when the rental market is at its lowest. And that's what it's going to be, because there's going to be a glut of space on the market. So many tenants are not reopening after this, Greg, all different types of tenants. And so landlords, you really shouldn't have a fear that you're going to get evicted if you don't pay your rent, or that the landlord's going to change your locks. The landlord does not want your space back. Nobody else wants your space today. So the landlord is just hoping that you will hold on to it. It's in the landlord's self-interest to keep you in that space. It's really expensive to replace a tenant. They have to go for months while the space is vacant. Then they have to pay a real estate commission. Then they might have to give a tenant allowance and free rent. And so the landlord can lose, $50,000 to $60,000 replacing you. They would have been better off just giving you a rent break, giving you a better deal. The negotiating power is with the tenant. Most of you just don't know that.
I appreciate that. Anyone else have any questions for Dale while we've got him on the line?
And don't hesitate to email me your questions as well if you've got something you want to discuss.
Do you think it pays
So we're looking at,
other tenants?
Say again?
Do you think it pays to coordinate with other tenants, like see what everybody else is hearing?
Possibly, but you want to be careful who you get in bed with, because if 2 or 3 of your other co-tenants haven't paid their rent for a couple of months or have been bad tenants and you've been a good tenant, that's who you're getting in bed with. So there's not a yes or no answer to that. It can go either way.
Do you want us to?
So we're looking at 15 to 25% rent decrease
On a
in
renewal.
the future if you
On a
decide to
renewal.
rent on a renewal. Okay.
I think that's how much I think the market rents are going to be negatively affected. Okay, if you're paying $5,000 a month now, the new market rent on that space is going to be about $4,000 a month, if not a little bit less. Some of you are in kind of industrial type buildings, and some of you are in really strong retail, grocery anchored plazas. If you're in a really, really hot plaza, that's still going to be a hot plaza, but tenants are going to close. Tons of tenants are going to take such a beating on this pandemic and on the recession that comes after it, that they will struggle through to the end of their lease. They just won't renew. Like your neighbor, if he's got 17 months left on his lease, don't be surprised if he just doesn't renew, and then he's gone suddenly, right? Your approach to negotiating your lease renewal would change if the building you're in right now is 100% full, and the building was going to be 80% full a year from now. You'd negotiate differently because you'd have more power.
Very good, sir. Thank you. Everyone, I'm going to be reporting on this. And can you get your email address one more time?
Dale Willerton at theleasecoach.com, or go to theleasecoach.com. Make sure you request a complimentary copy of my book and a free consult. And we'll try to talk to everybody that reaches out to us and answer your questions. Remember, tenants don't get what they deserve; they get what they negotiate. Let's go get them.
Very good. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, sir. It's been amazing.
You're welcome, Greg. My pleasure. Bye, everybody.